Jessica Tarlov leaned forward under the studio lights, her emerald green blazer catching the glare of the cameras, eyes sharp and unwavering as she said, "Take an IQ test, Senator Kennedy." The studio seemed to freeze around her words, every microphone, camera, and observer tuned to the moment, as if the air itself had thickened. Across from her, Senator Kennedy, in his slightly rumpled charcoal brown suit, adjusted his glasses low on his nose and regarded her with calm, steady eyes, unshaken by the challenge. Jesse Waters, seated between them, tried to keep the tone light, but the tension was palpable, a living thing in the room. Brad Stevens smirked quietly, and Lisa Wong's fingers tapped nervously on her clipboard. Jessica's voice was firm, almost sharp, as she explained that anyone making education policy should be able to demonstrate their intelligence, that understanding research, data, and the realities of schools was not just important but essential. Kennedy's response was quiet, almost gentle, but every word carried weight. "Miss Tarlov," he said, tilting his head just enough to show the faintest warning sign his staff recognized from years of debates, "I've been called many things in life. Too dumb is not usually one of them." Jessica pressed on, citing studies, research papers, and statistical reports, leaning slightly forward as if to physically push her point across. Kennedy listened, fingers brushing the sealed envelope in front of him, calm, controlled, letting the tension rise with every tap and subtle glance. The conversation moved between practical reality and analytical theory, between what someone had read in papers and what they had seen in classrooms, and Jessica's confidence, though strong, began to show small cracks under his measured questions. Kennedy asked her about limitations in research, about causation and correlation, about real-world challenges that data alone could not fully capture. Each pause, each hesitation in her responses, was noticed by the cameras, by the audience, and by the other panelists, heightening the suspense. She insisted that intelligence and qualifications should be visible, that a proper test would show capability, while Kennedy argued that true expertise came from experience, observation, and preparation. He asked pointed questions about her assumptions, her certainty, and the basis of her challenge. The studio air grew heavier, every glance, every micro-movement amplified. Kennedy's hands rested lightly on the envelope, the object itself growing into a character, holding its own suspense. Jessica's emerald blazer seemed to brighten in the harsh lights as she leaned in, eyes locking onto him, insisting on her position while quietly feeling the rising weight of the situation. Jesse Waters shifted in his seat, sensing the live tension, while Brad and Lisa observed every subtle reaction. Kennedy finally spoke of humility, of the chance that someone she underestimated could actually outperform expectations, and Jessica, for the first time, paused, considering the possibility. The exchange was no longer about a test alone but about judgment, assumptions, and respect. Kennedy spoke about teachers in rural areas, the difficulties they faced, burnout, lack of resources, and the limits of policy read from distant offices, contrasting sharply with Jessica's research-based arguments. The conversation moved seamlessly between intelligence, competence, and the realities of public service, the envelope always present, waiting, its seal untouched but full of promise. Each tap, each subtle motion of Kennedy's hand brought a new wave of tension, Jessica's confidence flickering, a slight tremor in her fingers gripping the edge of the desk, as the audience leaned closer, live or on screens across the country. Finally, Kennedy asked her directly, challenging her assumptions about accents, education, and capability. Jessica's replies were firm but slightly strained, and the cameras captured every nuance. The stakes were clear. This was a public duel, measured not just in words but in perception, in control, in subtle gestures that revealed more than speeches could. Kennedy's voice was calm but firm, every sentence building suspense as he emphasized experience, preparation, and the limits of academic knowledge versus real-world understanding. Jessica's hands tightened on the desk edge, her emerald green blazer sharp against the studio lights, and the envelope remained the silent observer of this battle, its contents poised to redefine the outcome. After what felt like an eternity of back and forth, Kennedy finally shifted his position, lifting the envelope just enough for the seal to crack faintly, a sound that seemed louder than it should, catching every eye in the studio. Jessica's expression flickered between confidence and uncertainty, her breathing slightly shallower as she waited. "Miss Tarlov," Kennedy said quietly, "you asked for proof. You demanded it. And before I read anything, I want to make sure you understand what you're asking." She nodded, swallowing hard, voice tight as she reaffirmed she would accept whatever the results showed. Kennedy's hands opened the envelope deliberately, letting the paper rest between them, heavy with significance, a single sheet with official letterhead. The studio seemed to hold its breath, the hum of air conditioning fading into silence as every participant, every camera, every viewer leaned closer to witness the moment. He explained that the assessment was independent, supervised by experts, and measured analytical reasoning, verbal comprehension, spatial intelligence, working memory, and executive cognitive function. Jessica's emerald green blazer seemed almost to vibrate with tension as she maintained eye contact, nodding stiffly, the tiniest flicker of doubt crossing her face. Kennedy paused before reading the results aloud, each percentile carefully noted, 98th overall, analytical reasoning 97th, spatial intelligence 96th, verbal comprehension 99th. The words landed like a physical weight in the studio, and Jessica froze, a slight tremor in her fingers, the confidence she had carried all evening shaken by the sheer thoroughness of the results. Jesse Waters leaned forward, eyes wide, Brad Stevens exhaled quietly, and Lisa Wong's hand covered her mouth in disbelief. Kennedy folded the paper slowly, slipping it back into the envelope, his calm demeanor intact, and then addressed Jessica directly, softly but firmly explaining that intelligence is not shown through accent, wardrobe, or television appearances but through preparation, knowledge, and the ability to rise when underestimated. Jessica's voice finally returned, thin and quiet, acknowledging she had misjudged the situation, realizing that data and research alone did not measure the complete picture of capability. Kennedy gathered the envelope and placed it in his jacket pocket, offering one final statement: next time you challenge someone's mind, make sure you have your own evidence ready. The studio remained silent, the tension ebbing as the lesson settled in. Cameras captured the subtle exchange of acknowledgement, of understanding between the two, and the audience, millions watching live or online, absorbed the dramatic reversal of expectations. In the aftermath, it was clear that the live debate had become more than an argument over intelligence. It was a lesson in humility, respect, and the difference between assumption and evidence. Jessica's emerald green blazer was still vibrant under the lights, but her posture softened slightly, the fierceness replaced with reflection, as Kennedy's calm, steady presence dominated the narrative with quiet authority. Every participant, every viewer, felt the impact. The envelope, the test, the arguments, and the slow unraveling of assumptions had revealed more than a number on paper. It had revealed character, preparation, and the way judgment should be measured. The cameras lingered a moment longer, capturing Kennedy's composed exit and Jessica's subtle acknowledgement that intelligence, preparation, and humility often mattered far more than appearances, claims, or assumptions. And in that studio, under the bright lights and unblinking lenses, the story concluded not with conflict, but with clarity. Proof is in preparation, and respect comes from understanding, not just assertion.